Wearing mixed fabrics. Among the many laws in the Torah, shatnez is one of the most perplexing. The prohibition against wearing garments made from a mixture of wool and linen. Stated clearly in Leviticus 19 verse 19 and Deuteronomy 22 verse 11, this law forbids the people of Israel from wearing material that has wool and linen woven together. There's no explicit scientific or moral reason given, making it one of the most mysterious ritual laws in Judaism. For the rabbis, shatnez was not about fashion, but a symbol of the sanctity of created order. In Jewish mystical thought, every material possesses its own soul or spiritual energy. To mix them is to blur the boundaries of God's creation. Just as the people were forbidden to sow different kinds of seed in the same field or to breed two different kinds of animals, shatnez emphasizes that God created order, not chaos. To this day, Orthodox Jews still observe this law with great seriousness. There are special shops and laboratories in Jerusalem and New York that offer shatnez testing services, where they actually examine the fibers of a garment under a microscope to ensure there is no hidden wool-linen blend. Ironically, in the modern era, this law may seem absurd, yet for its adherents, observing shatnez is the highest form of devotion, obeying God's command without needing to understand the reason why. Eating onions and garlic, one of the most unique rules in Buddhist monastic tradition, especially in the Theravada and Mahayana schools, is the prohibition against eating the 5 pungent plants, which include onions, garlic, leeks, chives, and scallions. This rule is written in the Vinaya Pitaka, the code of monastic discipline, and is also explained in Mahayana texts like the Lankavatara Sutra. The reason has nothing to do with hygiene or health, but rather with the spiritual effects these plants have on the mind and body. For monks, food is not merely for nutrition, it is a tool for maintaining inner tranquility. The 5 pungent plants are believed to arouse inner heat, passion, and aggression, which can disrupt the practice of meditation. In another interpretation, when eaten raw, they provoke anger and desire. When cooked, they lead to lethargy and worldly pleasure. There's even a belief that the strong odor of these plants can drive away the guardian deities who protect the sacred environment of the monastery. For this reason, many monasteries in Thailand, Myanmar, and even Japan prepare their meals entirely without these ingredients, which is why temple food often tastes mild and subtle. Although this rule may seem odd to lay people in the monastic world, to control the tongue is to control the mind. In the Buddhist view, desire can arise from something as small as the sharp taste of an onion, and preventing it is the highest form of spiritual discipline. Not touching money. In the Jain religion, the law of not touching money is not just a moral teaching, it is an extreme expression of their primary principle, ahimsa, or the absolute prohibition of violence in any form. Money, in the view of Jain monks, is a symbol of worldly attachment and the source of all forms of indirect violence, because nearly every economic activity, no matter how small, has the potential to harm living beings. Jain monastics, called sadhu and sadhavars, live without any personal possessions. They are not allowed to hold money, keep property, or even ask for anything directly. They may only accept food that is given to them voluntarily in limited quantities from the laity. Touching money is considered a form of spiritual violence because money is involved in activities that kill insects, cut down trees, or damage the earth for profit. Interestingly, lay Jains, especially in the regions of Gujarat and Rajasthan, are known for being successful merchants and bankers, but they distinguish themselves from the monastics. The monks maintain absolute purity, while the lay people strive to imitate this ideal in a more moderate way. For a true Jain monk, not touching money is a way of rejecting the entire worldly system, which is based on greed and exploitation. They choose an extreme path, walking barefoot, eating only once a day, and renouncing wealth so as not to create new karma of violence. In our modern materialistic world, this law seems impossible, but for Jains, this is precisely where the highest spiritual freedom lies. Not drinking coffee and tea, one of the most distinctive laws of the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints, more commonly known as the Mormon Church, is the prohibition against consuming coffee and tea. This rule comes from a revelation received by the church's founder, Joseph Smith, in 1833, which was later recorded in Doctrine and Covenants, section 89, titled The Word of Wisdom. In the text, the Lord warns the faithful against drinking hot drinks. Although not specified, Mormon prophets have interpreted this phrase to mean coffee and tea. This prohibition is not merely a matter of health, but a symbol of obedience and the purity of the body as a temple of God. In the 19th century, coffee and tea were considered stimulants that could lead to dependency and weaken self-control. The Mormon Church teaches that the body and spirit are one unified whole, so protecting the body from harmful substances is a way of safeguarding one's spiritual purity. Interestingly, this prohibition has become a marker of social identity. A devout Mormon would refuse Starbucks even in the middle of a desert. But the interpretation has evolved. In 2019, the church clarified that energy drinks are not included in the ban, but cold brew coffee is still forbidden because it comes from the same coffee bean. To many outsiders, this rule may seem strange, but for Latter-day Saints, turning down a cup of coffee in the morning is a small, daily sacrifice made for the sake of spiritual discipline and a clean community. Not keeping dogs. In classical Islamic law, based primarily on a number of authentic hadith, keeping a dog is considered impermissible, except for specific purposes such as hunting, guarding livestock, or protecting a garden. A well-known hadith in Sahih al-Bukhari states that whoever keeps a dog except one for hunting or for guarding livestock, his reward will be diminished each day. Furthermore, there is a belief that angels will not enter a home in which a dog is present. The basis for this prohibition is both ritual and symbolic. In the context of 7th century Arabia, stray dogs were often associated with impurity, disease, and aggressive behavior. For this reason, Islamic law classifies a dog's saliva as severely impure, najis mughaladza, meaning that if it touches a vessel, the vessel must be washed 7 times, one of those times with earth. What is interesting, however, is that the Quran itself never explicitly forbids dogs. In Surah Al-Kahf, the chapter of the cave, there is even the story of the righteous youths who were accompanied by a dog in the cave. For some modern scholars, this prohibition is more hygienic and contextual than theological, but for conservative groups, a dog remains a creature that is unfit to be inside the home because it obstructs the blessings brought by angels. Ironically, Islam also emphasizes compassion toward all creatures, including dogs. The Prophet Muhammad himself once praised a person who gave water to a thirsty dog. Thus, this law exists between two principles, ritual purity and universal compassion. Not touching lower caste. One of the most controversial socio-religious laws in India's history is the caste system, or Varna, and its most extreme manifestation, the prohibition against touching those called Dalits, literally meaning the oppressed. In ancient legal texts like the Manusmriti, the laws of Manu, society was divided into 4 main castes: the Brahmin, priests, the Kshatriya, warriors, the Vaishya, merchants, and the Shudra, laborers. Outside this system were the Dalits, who were considered so low that even their touch was believed to be spiritually defiling. This prohibition gave rise to the social concept known as untouchability. Dalits were forbidden from entering temples, using the same wells, or even walking on the same streets as higher castes. In some ancient regions, even their shadow was considered polluting. Ironically, this concept did not arise from the core spiritual teachings of Hinduism, but from a social structure that became attached to rituals of purity. Over time, this system became an instrument of social oppression for centuries. Reformers like Mahatma Gandhi called the Dalits Harijan, children of God, while the revolutionary figure B.R. Ambedkar, a Dalit himself, rejected the system entirely and converted to Buddhism in 1956. Today, untouchability is outlawed in India, but its traces can still be felt in social practices in rural areas. This law shows how a concept of spiritual purity can be twisted into the most extreme form of social discrimination, a clear example of religion being distorted by human hierarchy. Not cutting hair. In the teachings of Sikhism, one of the most sacred and unique laws is the prohibition against cutting one's hair, known as kesh. This is not merely a style or tradition, but one of the 5 Ks, 5 articles of faith required for every initiated Sikh: kesh, unshorn hair; kara, a steel bracelet; kanga, a wooden comb; kachera, holy undershorts; and kirpan, a small dagger. This prohibition originates from the teachings of Guru Gobind Singh, the 10th Sikh Guru, in the 17th century. He emphasized that the human body is the perfect creation of God, Waheguru, and should not be altered. Hair is a symbol of total acceptance of the divine will. Allowing it to grow naturally is an act of rejecting vanity and the manipulation of the body. Spiritually, kesh symbolizes strength, discipline, and devotion. Sikh men cover their long hair with a turban, which has become a symbol of honor and moral responsibility. To cut one's hair, even a single strand, can be considered a grave violation of one's vows of faith. In the modern context, however, this law often creates a dilemma, as many young Sikhs in the West face social pressure because of their appearance. Nevertheless, for Orthodox Sikhs, kesh remains a sacred mark of identity, a reminder that their bodies do not belong to the world, but to God. Interestingly, there is a mystical view that long hair helps to preserve spiritual energy and balance the mind during meditation. So, for a true Sikh, letting their hair grow is not about aesthetics. It is a form of complete obedience to the divine design. Not using musical instruments. One of the most surprising laws in the religious world is the prohibition of music, an art form that many consider universal and divine, but which certain religious groups view as dangerous. In Islam, a number of classical scholars, such as Ibn Taymiyyah and Al-Ghazali, debated fiercely over the ruling on music. Most conservative schools, especially within Wahhabism and Salafism, forbid the use of musical instruments because they are considered to tempt carnal desires and make the heart heedless of the remembrance of Allah. Certain hadiths even state that there will be people from my nation who will seek to make lawful silk, intoxicants, and musical instruments, which is interpreted as a stern warning. A similar prohibition also appeared among Christian Puritans in the 17th century. Groups like the Amish, Quakers, and early Calvinists believed that worldly music fostered pride and distracted from prayer. In some Puritan communities, even church singing was to be performed without any instruments, a practice known as a cappella psalmody. However, this prohibition is not without its spiritual logic. Music is seen as capable of moving human emotions faster than reason and can therefore lead the soul away from spiritual tranquility. Ironically, many traditions that once rejected music have since given rise to the most beautiful forms of spiritual music, from Islamic nasheeds to church hymns. This law reveals a great paradox of religion. That which can inspire the soul can also be seen as a threat to its purity. Not owning cars and electricity, the Amish in the United States live in the 21st century, but with rules that seem to have stopped in the 18th. One of their most peculiar laws is the prohibition against using modern electricity, automobiles, and advanced technology. This rule comes from the Ordnung, an unwritten moral code that governs every aspect of Amish life, from their clothing and homes to their interactions with the outside world. This prohibition is not due to ignorance or a rejection of progress, but rather a fear of pride and worldly attachment. For them, technology creates distance between people in their community. Cars, for example, allow a person to travel far and lose ties with their neighbors. Electricity enables entertainment and luxuries that can foster ego. For this reason, they continue to use the horse and buggy, oil lamps, and manual tools. Spiritually, the primary goals are total simplicity and self-reliance. Living without electricity means living without advertisements, social media, and other distractions, a constant form of modern fasting. Yet, paradoxically, some Amish now make limited use of electricity and telephones for business, but these are always borrowed from non-Amish so that they are not considered to own the technology themselves. This law may look absurd in the eyes of the digital world, but for the Amish, rejecting modern convenience is a way of preserving the soul's purity from the temptations of the world. For them, heaven is found closer in the silence of the fields than in the glow of a phone screen. Marry a brother's widow. One of the strangest and most ancient laws in the Bible is that of Levirate marriage, the obligation for a man to marry his brother's widow if his brother dies without leaving any descendants. This law is clearly recorded in Deuteronomy 25, verses 5 through 10, which states that if a man dies without a son, his brother shall go in to her and take her as his wife, and perform the duty of a husband's brother to her, to perpetuate his brother's name. The purpose of this law was noble for its time, to ensure that a family line did not die out, and to provide economic protection for the widow, who in that era had no inheritance rights. A child born from such a marriage was legally considered the descendant of the deceased, not the biological father. In this way, the family name and its ancestral land were preserved. In practice, however, this law often created moral and social conflicts. The most famous example is the story of Judah and Tamar in Genesis 38, where Judah refused to give his remaining son to Tamar, the widow of his deceased sons. This led Tamar to deceive Judah into impregnating her himself, a story that became a major scandal in Israelite tradition. In a modern context, this law certainly seems strange, even appalling, But in an ancient world that had no social security or women's rights, it was considered a just spiritual and social solution. Today, the law survives only as a symbolic relic, a reminder that the concept of family duty in the Bible could sometimes extend beyond the limits of our modern moral comfort.